This is Thinking Clearly, where political extremes meet the common sense center. What happens if Putin finally crosses NATO's red line? For years, Vladimir Putin has been testing the West. Not always with tanks, not always with missiles, often with things that are much harder to respond to: drones, sabotage, cyber attacks, covert operations, assassination plots, infrastructure attacks. And now we know that CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently flew to Moscow with a very specific warning: do not attack NATO, especially the Baltic states. That should get everybody's attention, because intelligence reporting suggests that Putin may not be looking for a massive war with NATO. He may be looking for something much more dangerous in its own way: a limited confrontation he thinks he can control. Maybe a cyber attack, maybe sabotage, maybe a false flag operation, maybe a limited incursion into Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania. Something serious enough to test NATO, but murky enough that Russia can deny responsibility and NATO countries can argue over whether it really crosses the line. And that raises the question we should all be asking right now: what actually happens if Putin goes too far? The first thing people say is Article 5, Article 5. NATO's famous mutual defense commitment essentially says that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. But Article 5 is not some automatic button that launches World War III. The NATO countries still have to decide what happened, who was responsible, and what response is appropriate. That is easy if Russian tanks roll across the Estonian border flying Russian flags. It gets much harder if a power station explodes, or a railway is sabotaged, or a drone carrying explosive hits a military logistics hub, or armed men suddenly appear and Moscow says they're not ours. I'll remember that in 2014 in Crimea, the little green men. Putin understands that ambiguity. In fact, he has built much of his strategy around it. We have already seen suspected Russian operations across Europe: warehouse fires, rail sabotage, drone incursions, attacks on critical infrastructure, assassination plots, and intelligence operations. The individual incidents often look small enough that nobody wants to start a war over them. But that may be the entire point. Each attack below the threshold keep NATO arguing, keep Europe nervous, and learn exactly how far you can push before somebody finally says enough. The Baltic states are where this becomes especially dangerous. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are NATO members. They are also former Soviet republics sitting right on Russia's doorstep. If Putin wants to test whether NATO really means what it says, the Baltics are an obvious place to do it. And here is where the situation gets even more complicated. Russia reportedly needs hundreds of thousands more troops. Putin has tried very hard to avoid another full national mobilization because that is politically dangerous at home for him. One theory is that a limited confrontation with NATO could actually help him. If Putin can convince Russians that Russia itself is under attack, patriotism goes up, recruitment goes up, and suddenly he may have another wave of volunteers without having to order a hugely unpopular mobilization. That does not mean Putin wants a full war with NATO. He probably doesn't. The danger is that he may believe he can create just enough crisis to benefit politically at home and still control the escalation abroad. That is an enormous gamble, because what happens if one of these so-called limited operations kills 50 NATO citizens, or blows up a military aircraft, or destroys a major power facility? What if Poland, Estonia, or Germany says, that's it, that this was an attack? Does NATO respond militarily? Does the United States respond? Does Russia retaliate? And suddenly the limited crisis Putin thought he could control becomes something nobody can control? That is why Ratcliffe's trip matters. The message was not simply, we don't like what you're doing. It was essentially, do not miscalculate, because Putin believes he knows where NATO's red line is. Putin may believe he understands theirs, and history is full of wars that began because both sides thought they understood exactly how far the other side would go. Trump has said he does not believe Putin will attack NATO. I hope he's right, But if the CIA director felt it necessary to fly to Moscow and personally warn the Russians not to do it, somebody inside the American government is seriously worried enough to take the possibility very seriously. And that is why the real question is not whether Putin wants World War III. I doubt he really does. The real question is whether Putin thinks he can keep pushing, sabotaging, threatening, testing NATO without ever quite crossing the line. Because sooner or later, somebody gets the calculation wrong. And when nuclear powers get that calculation wrong, the consequences can become very big, very fast. Putin has been warned. Now we find out whether he believes the warning. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you would please like this video and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family, I would really appreciate it to help us continue to grow. We have been growing very nicely lately, and that's because of you and your viewership. So I thank you. And remember, again, I'll just mention it one more time. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.